Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the August meeting of the Lamoille County Democratic Committee. My name is Bruce Olson. I'm the chair of the committee and I'll be hosting tonight's meeting. Before we get started, I just think we need to take a moment to remember a really remarkable American, John Lewis, who did so much, to really move our country forward in terms of civil rights, human rights. In many ways, he was an ordinary man who did extraordinary things. And he was someone who had a moral compass that was always true. And, he could have given up many times. He endured many sacrifices. I say not just for the good of the civil rights movement, really for the good of America. And I would just like to take a moment to remember him and have a moment of silence. So please join me in that moment of silence. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I just always hope we remember to make good trouble, as John Lewis always said to do. And he did a lot of good trouble, made a lot of good trouble, and made a lot of advancements for all of us. So our first speaker tonight is our Vermont's Attorney General, T.J. Donovan. I think he's a remarkable Attorney General that's done a lot in many aspects in consumer rights and other issues to help us as Vermonters. And I don't want to take too long, but TJ, are you ready? Do you have any for your comments?
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for holding that moment of silence for John Lewis. I don't know if you all watched his memorial service. I watched some of it last week, and it was remarkable. The stories of his perseverance and endurance, as you said. But it was also a remarkable speech by President Obama, and an anecdote that was shared that when President Obama was inaugurated on Inauguration Day, John Lewis went up to him to get the program signed, and President Obama wrote simply, "Because of you, John." And what a icon, not only of civil rights, but of course racial justice and that evolution, and that those simple words, "because of you," I think really epitomized all that John Lewis did in the cause of freedom, in the cause of justice, the cause of equality, by those words of President Obama. And I took my son, Jack, who I think you just all met, to the Flynn. Probably was it about a year ago that John Lewis was here at the Flynn in Burlington, talking about his book March, which is, of course, about the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And the book is a I think they call it a graphic novel. It's a kid's book, and it was just wonderful. And so, Bruce, thank you for holding that moment in memory and honor of John Lewis. Great to be with you all. I want to talk about one bill in particular, and it's appropriate that we talk about it after that moment of silence of John Lewis and remembering John Lewis, who was brutally beaten a number of times by the police for fighting for his civil rights and others' civil rights, and in the cause, as I said, of racial justice and freedom and equality. And the moment that we're in right now, still debating and talking and fighting over those issues of racial justice, of freedom, of equality, and how we can do things differently and better here in our state, and to talk about police accountability. There's a bill, and I know that Dan and Dave are on, in regards to the use of force of police. And it changes the standard about the use of force to essentially a necessity standard, to only use force when it's necessary. And I support it. It's complicated. It needs a lot of work, but I'm going around talking to county committees, giving my perspective in an effort for all of us to become more aware and educated and really urge the legislature to consider this, whether it be in August or January, and for the community to weigh in on this as well. Because I think when it comes to police in Vermont, we do things well, but we always can do things better. It is clear to me that we need more trust in law enforcement and less force. And from a prosecutor's perspective, I'm part of that because we review those use of force cases, certainly the use of lethal force, and oftentimes the use of non-lethal force. They go to prosecutors, your state's attorney, and when there is a killing, it comes to the Attorney General's office. And the bottom line is we train to the standard. Yes, we need to do more about de-escalation and mental health and understanding cultural competency. All very important. The legislature has done good work on those issues. But we train to the standard, and we can talk about how we need to diversify our police force and recruit better and change, because policing has changed dramatically and we need to change with it. But I want to talk about the standard of review. So the California standard, which the Vermont legislature will take a look at in August, is, as I said, that necessity to use force only when it's necessary. And I think that is right. There's a Seattle standard that talks about proportionality and necessary, and I think that's a very good one too. But what Vermont and the vast majority of jurisdictions use right now, which really requires the prosecutors to only look at seconds of an incident to make a decision, is this. It's a reasonable person standard, whether or not a reasonable person would be placed in fear of death or serious bodily injury based on the facts presented to them. And under that current standard, as prosecutors who are charged with reviewing these cases, we look at the last couple minutes, if not seconds, of an encounter. Where was somebody's hand? What was in his hand? What was he doing? Was that a threat? And to change it to a necessity standard, we would look at the totality of the circumstances, and we would look at the tactical decisions in terms of those encounters with Vermonters, and would draw into those issues of de-escalation and mental illness. And I want to share a story that I think demonstrates the need to change the standard. When I was state's attorney in Chittenden County, there was an individual who was living, 77-year-old man, and he was in public housing, and he was mentally ill, and he was being evicted. And I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is why is a 77-year-old man who's sick being evicted from public housing who is sick? And the police were called. Burlington police were called. And at first, they did everything right. They tried to talk to him. He was in his apartment. He was in his apartment alone. This was an apartment complex, so there's multiple units. They tried to de-escalate the situation, but that didn't work. And a hard question that we need to ask ourselves, that we don't under the current standard, but we would under this new standard, would be, what is the risk to public safety? At that point, when somebody's barricaded in their own home, they certainly may be a risk to themselves, but they're not a risk to the public safety at large. At some point in time, the Burlington police decided to enter his apartment. And they went in, and a number of officers, they had shields, they had tasers, they had guns. And they went in, and this gentleman was hiding in his bathroom, and he was behind a shower curtain. And the police pulled back the shower curtain, and he had a knife. And the police tased him. And the taser didn't work, or it wasn't effective, or didn't hit him correctly, but it didn't work. And he came out of the shower waving the knife at the police, going towards the police with the knife. And the police shot and killed him. And as a prosecutor, my job was to review that case. And I ruled it justified based on our current standard. And it's one that to this day, and I think for probably the rest of my days, I'll wonder if I got that right. I think I got it right legally. But I've always been troubled by it for a number of those reasons that I just articulated about what does it says about our community in terms of how we treat those who are mentally ill, public housing, evictions, that on that type of dispute, we're sending in the police and not a mental health worker. And I want to be clear that he was verbally abusive to people, and there's certainly more facts in the beginning that I could talk about. But based on our current standard, that review was really those last couple seconds and minutes inside the apartment building, and whether or not a reasonable person would be placed in fear of death or serious bodily with somebody coming out as a knife. If we changed it to necessary, you then would have to exhaust every possible option. You would ask those critical questions about tactics, about going in, whether or not you needed to go into somebody's house who was barricaded by himself. There would be issues of whether or not crisis workers could come back and try to de-escalate the situation. And whatever the possibility was, it would have to be reviewed. It would have to be explored. It would have to be exhausted, because force should always be the last resort and used only when it's absolutely necessary. And I think if we do that, and you hold that standard, because you always train to the standard, then all those issues that we've talked about, that we are moving in the right direction, but we can move quicker by changing the standard of de-escalation, of identifying mental illness, of understanding cultural competency, of truly building more trust in law enforcement, to truly be that community policing, to solve those problems because so many calls come to the police that aren't crimes. But we've left it to the police, and the police have a tough job. And I want to be clear, I don't support defunding the police, because I don't know what that means. I support shrinking the footprint of law enforcement, absolutely. Law enforcement doesn't need to be the answer to every problem in our society. We don't need to have armed police going to resolve mental health calls. We don't need police to have military gear and tactics and the message that sends to the community that we're at war with you, we don't trust you. So I totally support shrinking the footprint of police and investing in restorative justice. And you guys do a tremendous job in Lamoille County, let me tell you, with restorative justice with Heather Hobart. She does a great job, really the state model. But we could do things differently. And this would be a bold step. It's complicated, it's hard, there's a lot of nuances, but we are at a moment, I think we all know, in our nation's history. And Bruce, as you so rightly talked about John Lewis, who knew that we were at a moment too, where you can draw that parallel, that arc of justice to what he did in 1960 and 1963 and 1965 to what happened, the murder of George Floyd in 2020, that we're still debating these issues, and we have to go bold, and we have to radically change the way we do business. It's not to eliminate the police. It's to change the way how we police. And I think there's support for it. And I got more of these stories, too many of them, frankly, where people have called the police because a child is in the throes of a mental health crisis, and it ends up with their son dead on their front yard in Burlington. And talking to the mother and father, said, had we ever known, we would have never would have called. And changing the tactics about why do you have to pursue somebody who perhaps didn't show up into court because they overslept or had a job. It doesn't mean we have to issue a warrant that when you see him and it involves a chase and endangers not only that person, but perhaps the rest of the public. So I know that Dave and Dan have done a lot of good work. Certainly body cameras, the work you guys just passed, I think in June, banning chokeholds and mandating body cameras is great work. We need to collect more data when it comes to the use of force. And I want to say this about use of force too. We got, I think, 77 police departments in our state. And look, by and large, the men and women who are the police officers in the state of Vermont do a great job. They are not perfect. I am not perfect, but they do good work. Do we have problems? Yes, we do, but we can do better. But when it comes to use of force policies, let's just have one in our state, not 77 for every department. Let's modernize how we police. Let's reimagine how we define what a safe and vibrant community is. That good schools, affordable housing, access to healthcare, robust mental health care. These are all the foundations of a safe community. And I can tell you, because I talk to the police chiefs weekly, they're willing to make some changes. They know that we have to change. They know that this is a moment where we have to modernize and do something different, that the conventional police work of the 20th century does not meet the challenge of the 21st century. It is those skills of compassion, of empathy, of understanding that people may view the police differently, not as T.J. Donovan, who grew up in Burlington, Vermont. And the only thing, as I like to say, I'm never worried about driving through a red light is the ticket I'm going to get, not whether or not I'm going to lose my life. And for us to understand our privilege and to reflect on that and to do things differently. So I'm terrible with numbers. I'm sure Dan or Dave knows the bill. I think it's 805, use of force, but it's the use of force bill that would have Vermont adopt the California standard, which is the necessity standard. I think Vermont should adopt it. I want to be clear. I've asked that there should be conversations with all the stakeholders because this is complicated. This would be a game-changing move, but I think we should do it. I think that, as I said, we're at a turning point. We need to be bold. We need to do things differently. You guys have a great criminal justice system in Lamoille County. As I said, with Heather Hobart and the restorative justice, Roger Marcoux does a great job as your sheriff. Todd Schode is doing a great job as your state's attorney. But we can do more and we can do better. And I think this is a bill that, if adopted and if passed, would make Vermont a better, a more safe, a more inclusive, and a more fair state for everybody. So that privilege, as I said to some news reporter, was asking me one day about the issues of policing and racial bias. I said, look, I was watching my kids play basketball in the driveway. And I said, God forbid anything happens. I have no hesitation in calling the police. That's privilege. Not everybody feels that way, but we need to work towards a world where everybody does feel that way and views the police as community partners and not the enemy. We have work to do, and that's my ask of all of you to talk to Dan, talk to Dave, talk to everybody, get educated on this issue, and let's move Vermont forward. Happy to take questions, Bruce.
Okay. Thank you, TJ. That's certainly a good report as to the actions that we need to take to change how policing is done, not in Vermont, but certainly across the country. I would open it up now for questions. Does anybody have a question? Diane, did you have a question?
So I have more of a, if I may, it's more of a comment. I think yes, defunding the police is an unfortunate term because you have to explain what you mean and people get defensive. But I think also having more resources for other areas, for example, mental health issues, it's not fair to the police, frankly, to put them in a situation where somebody's coming at you with a knife and you fear for your life because whoever shot him had to live with that for the rest of his life. And I choose to believe that nobody can take another life without, feeling that severely. So I think what you described is a good step, but I think we also need to see where are we deploying the police. Some people in our society, particularly if they come from other parts of the country and they're colored, their instinct may be just to be afraid when they see a policeman. I grew up in Sweden and the police was your friend, it was very different. than the situation that we have now. And I'm so happy, Dave and Dan, that you're working on this, because something has to change. It's been going on for too long, and we do need radical change, so that, I mean, my heart just breaks for the people that are, you know, like you said, if their son is acting up and he ends up being shot. I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's this is, you know, look, I respect your point about the impact on officers who fire that shot. You know, this is traumatic for everybody. But I think what we have to do, and this goes when I talk about the training, and it really goes to this idea of whether or not we're going to train police, and you may have heard this phrase, kind of as warriors towards your community. That's that military gear and equipment, which I don't think, look, and I know bad things happen, so I'm fine being prepared, but if people are protesting, we don't need to have military gear, and thankfully we haven't done that in Vermont.
I grew up with police that didn't even have guns,
right.
And it actually worked.
Right.
I don't, you know, then I think that's the ideal situation, you know, that's because if you come at it from an us versus them point of view, that's not how you resolve conflict, and there are no winners in that situation.
Right. And I think, you know, the opposite of that warrior view is that guardian view, that we're here to guard the community and protect the community, everybody in our community. As I always said, you know, when you have the police at these protests, they're there to protect the protesters. That's the job, because that exercise of somebody's First Amendment right is a lawful exercise of somebody's constitutional right. And somewhere, and, you know, I'm grateful that in Vermont, we didn't seem to have the issues that you saw in other places. But, you know, my directive, and I was on the phone with police chiefs saying, hey, listen, with these protests, give them a wide berth and let people exercise the right. And that means if you have to shut down traffic for a few minutes, we do that. So let's exercise restraint. Let's exercise creative problem-solving skills, and let's work collaboratively with the community in their lawful exercise of their constitutional rights. And we're not going in there to arrest people. And I think, I'm pretty sure almost everywhere, we have not had any incidences of people being arrested. Maybe one in St. Johnsbury, for protesting about the George Floyd murder. So I think that's a good thing that we should be proud of in Vermont.
I have a question. Bruce, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
T.J., I have a question along the same line that Marina was just addressing, and that is about aggressiveness in police force. And as a social worker, I agree that we have made our police responsible for things they should not even have to do, and we should focus on de-escalation. But I wonder, how much of our military equipment are we in Vermont purchasing? Because I have read about this happening nationally, and it is so distressing to hear that the military is unloading weapons to state police forces. Are we doing that here?
We definitely have military equipment with police. I think the state police have put very strict regulations on the use of, I think there's one vehicle that we don't see it, frankly, because it's the regulations and guidelines when it can be used is so strict. But the answer is yes. There is that military equipment and military style equipment in local police departments as well. And I think, frankly, I think there is a bill, and I think the police chiefs will say, we need to look at this because the message it sends to the community
Exactly.
when you show up ready for war, frankly. And I think you saw that with this unfortunate and frankly illegal display of federal agents in Portland, Oregon, which is something that is about as un-American that I can imagine, where you send in a federal force to quell, again, a lawful protest about the government. And, you know, I don't know if I'm more upset. I don't know if I could be more upset with Donald Trump. I think maybe more upset with Bill Barr, the Attorney General, who deployed him. And the idea that we have federal law enforcement officers or any state law enforcement officers not identifiable to the members of the public, because let me tell you something, the police, including federal law enforcement, only derive their power from the community and are answerable to the community. And this idea that we're going to have paramilitary forces in our cities is outrageous, it's illegal, and it has to stop. Sorry, I'm getting fired up on this one, but
I'm glad you feel that way. I guess
I think it's about as un-American as a display I've ever seen. In fact, I don't know if any of you saw this. I think it was the New York Times yesterday. There was an article that had pictures of the fatigues that the federal law enforcement officers were wearing. They had pictures of these paramilitary groups who were showing up at different rallies. And they're indistinguishable. You can tell the difference. And they're there for one, and the uniform and the gear is there for one simple reason: to intimidate, to suppress. And so this is an issue that we haven't seen in Vermont, thankfully, but we should be prepared. And I think, unfortunately, we will see more of it this fall prior to the election. And we need to be prepared.
how are the police, how are you, or who's working with the police chiefs here in Vermont to try to I guess train them to de-escalate and not have this imposing militaristic viewpoint? I mean, I agree with you 100%, but what is being done to prevent it from escalating? Because as we saw in Washington and as we saw in Oregon, by having these military equipped police show up, it only escalates. It does not de-escalate.
That's right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, a couple of different things in Vermont. I'll try to give you the thumbnail sketch because it's long and complicated. But first of all, Dan and Dave are doing a great job for you guys in the legislature on these issues and so many more. So thank you. And there's been a lot of oversight from the legislature on law enforcement in Vermont, and that's a good thing. To go down one more level, though, is what the structure, if you will, is the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, which oversees and regulates police, if you will, in our state. And there's a lot of movement afoot there to modernize. And I'm proud to say a lot of the push to modernize and change is coming from within, coming from the police chiefs themselves, who I think understand that this is the time that they need to change. And so that's kind of the board that oversees, but then you have many different, I think, layers from local prosecutors to, different committees of jurisdiction, the legislature, to the attorney general. Civilian oversight boards are something I support. Any local law enforcement, again, the police derive their power from the people. So civilian oversight, I think, is a critical, important tool as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim, you're next, and then we'll have Dan and then Joe for questions. Tim, unmute yourself and you're ready.
You can mute yourself.
Tim, you gotta unmute yourself.
No, you gotta. touchpad. Elaine.
Okay, there we go.
Is that good?
Yeah,
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
I can't
Yes.
hear you now. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Good.
So my question is this, and I guess it's for Dan and Dave as much as it's for you, TJ. Is use of force going to be extended to the Department of Corrections? Because there are incidents, not a lot, but there are incidents where people are incarcerated and excessive force is used. So that's my question.
Yeah, Tim, I want to thank you for raising that because nobody has raised that issue to me. And that is a legitimate issue and concern. So thank you. And I actually had not thought about that. So I want to thank you for bringing that up. My quick answer on that is I don't think the standard that I just discussed or the bill, but Dave and Dan may know better than I, would extend to correctional officers because it talks about certified law enforcement officers, and I don't think COs are. That's my initial thought on that, but I'll ask Dave or Dan if they have any opinion on that. I do think, Tim, you raise a great issue, and those issues of justice, those issues of fairness, the issues of use of force and de-escalation are just as important in our correctional facilities as they are in our communities. And you know what? Thank you, because I didn't think of that, and I want to thank you for speaking that up, for speaking on that one. But I know, Dan, you want to say anything on that?
I agree. I mean, I think especially with the fact that we're sending people out of state where we have less control into privately run through Civic Corps, you know, we should be looking at how those individuals are treated, not only in Vermont, but outside of Vermont. And I don't know if it's including corrections officers, but maybe we should be looking at that as well. And but I do want to add that there is an opportunity. Well, back up. Thanks, TJ, for being here tonight. And thanks for all your props to Dave and I. Appreciate that. There is, I just want people to know, and I forwarded to Bruce so he can send it out, that on August 6th, 12th, and 16th, the House Government Operations and the Judiciary Committee will be holding virtual meetings for input from community members on changes to Vermont law enforcement. And I'm sure Bruce would be able to forward that out with kind of more of the details on it. I sent you the link from Lucy provided actually me. So
I'll send that out to our email
opportunity
list.
to participate. Yeah, this is an opportunity to participate and really think about some of the legislation as we move forward to make sure that we are protecting the citizens of Vermont. So thank you.
Yeah, that'll go out to our email list. I'll get that done after the meeting. Did you have anything else, Dan?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, Joe, you're next. Where is she? There she is.
Sorry, hello.
Hey, Joe.
Did you say my name?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Do you have a question for TJ?
I did. My hand was up. Thank you for seeing that. Actually, it was more of a comment. And I just wanted to say, TJ, I'm completely on your page. Thank you. Seriously. But we were forwarded, or we were sent a message, the DEM memo today. And there's information on the 3 dates that the committee is meeting. And Bruce, I'm going to forward this to you so that people can have access to it. You're also, if you want to give input, you're allowed 2 minutes. And that information is on here as well. So Bruce, I'm going to forward this information to you right now.
Okay.
If you
I'll email it to everybody after the meeting.
Great. Thank you. That was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have. Can you hear me there,
Okay,
Bruce?
Bill. Yes,
Well,
go ahead, Bill.
Something which really bothers me that we let the right wing get away with in terms of defining what they're doing. They say law and order, which sounds pretty righteous, but actually what they're doing is a governmental corruption of the Constitution. It's hard to get this down into a bumper sticker thing, I guess. And the order they're talking about is suppression of the civilian population. I mean, I guess these folks have never read the Constitution, which they always cite in general, but not in the specifics. What they're doing is a gross violation of what is directly in the Constitution in terms of the right of the people to peaceably assemble for redress of grievances. And, we do that in a lot of ways. Same thing with the whole abortion thing. They say pro-life and so on instead of pro-choice. But anyway, we won't get into all that. But in terms of addressing that, I mean, the task of somehow reducing what's really going on to something closer to a bumper sticker that we can put in there to not let them get away with that. And maybe a practical suggestion to all the police chiefs we're communicating with, maybe they should all get a copy of the Constitution. It would be nice if the people actually read it. I think they would be greatly surprised by what's in there. So just my 2 cents worth.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to see you. The other thing that I'd say when we talk about the Constitution on this is, an amendment nobody talks about, but is right on point in this. Of course, that's the 10th Amendment. That is the police powers, right? That those powers not specifically enumerated to the federal government are reserved for the states. Well, how you police your community is a local issue. And again, the idea that the federal government would come in to build, to use your word, to quell a local protest, and this idea that somehow was there to protect a federal building. I could go on for hours on this. It just resolves, I think, for me, the need that we all stay united and elect Joe Biden president in November and end what can only be described as a nightmare for our country.
TJ, I have one question, and that concerns the number of prisoners that are housed in out-of-state prisons. I think I just read that 85 Vermonters in Mississippi prisons have been diagnosed with COVID-19.
Yep.
And, that seems like a horrible thing, that they're so far away from their families. I mean, if they're going to serve their time, they think they would be in the community. We have a greater chance of actually doing something productive to get them back into society. What can we do to bring those folks back, house them in Vermont?
Yep, absolutely. Great question. And I think the first thing when we talk about the COVID, the protocols that are happening internally at Vermont DLC need to be extended to Vermonters who are being incarcerated out of state. The issue, everybody was getting tested in Vermont, and they were only testing the folks that had symptoms down in Mississippi. Well, we all know that this is a asymptomatic virus. So that's number one. The prison population is at an all-time low, and there may be enough capacity to bring folks home, or we're getting darn close to it. A couple things that we need to do. Number one, we've built out for the first time a statewide infrastructure of 3 different exit ramps, as I described them, in every county to divert people from our prison population. And it's been a great success. It's all about fairness. It's all about looking at crime almost as a public health issue, because you're dealing with the issues of course, addiction and mental illness. And so that's kind of the front side work that we're doing. The other work that we need to do is housing. Housing. Critical issue, because a lot of folks are held past their minimums for lack of what's called adequate housing. Well, what does adequate housing mean to somebody who's never had adequate housing? And it's almost this middle class definition. And so we need to invest in more transitional housing. Now, another big bill that's, I think, coming up, and Dave and Dan, I may be wrong about this, is this: we need to change our furlough system. I'm going way in the weeds here. So everybody who gets sentenced in Vermont gets what's called a minimum sentence and a maximum sentence. You are eligible for release on your minimum. So 1 to 3 years. You're not going to do the 3 likely. You'll be eligible for release at year 1. But if you don't have housing, the adequate housing, you won't get out, and you'll go past your minimum and go and maybe do year 3 or do it till you have adequate housing. But let's say you do get out and you're on what's called furlough. Furlough is this supervision by DOC in the community where you can get what's called interrupts. And correction officers, and Tim, you probably know this better than I do, have the ability without seeing a judge, without seeing a prosecutor, based on a furlough violation, putting somebody back in jail. It drives the incarceration population. We need to end it. We put a lot of guidelines on it and a lot more structure, but it's one of those in the weeds things that we really got to drill down to. And if we drive that number down on those furlough and probation violations, meaning people who are already out in the community going back into jail on some sort of violation, that will continue to decrease the number. And then finally, continue to do more on our bail reform. We did great work on that. A good bill came out of the House and the Senate a couple of years ago. It's passed. We need to make it, we need to change it a little bit more, in my opinion, because look, as I always say, $250 may not mean a lot to most folks, but when you have $0, you're not getting out. And how that works is you get held on bail, you're going to make a rational decision to get out of jail. And you're going to take a conviction. You'll plea bargain. You'll take a reduced charge. You'll get credit for time served. You come out with probation. What happens is people get that criminal conviction. Impact on housing, impact on jobs, impact on education. And we have marginalized an entire subset of our population, mostly people of color, mostly the poor, in the name of public safety and criminal records, and it has not worked. I could go on, Bruce, for hours on this one, but I think we hit the furloughs at 3 different spots of the system. Front side diversion across the board, middle furlough probation violations, back end housing, continue to reduce the population, build the capacity in state, which is about 1,500. We can get everybody up here. I think we can even go lower than 1,500.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Does anybody else have any questions for TJ? Comments? Hearing none? All right, TJ, well, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your very insightful comments about the justice system here in Vermont and nationwide. And we wish you the best of luck in November.
All right, thank you guys. And thanks for having me, and thanks for the work you're doing. And we got a lot of work ahead of us for November. I'm not too worried about August, November.
Okay.
Thanks, TJ.
Very good.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. For our next segment, we're going to have Claire Cummings, who is the organizer director for the Vermont